To truly understand the darkest corners of the human psyche, one must sometimes confront the monster not in the abyss of space, nor in the cyclopean ruins beneath the waves, but in the reflection of one's own gaze, a truth more shattering than any cosmic horror. And nowhere is this terrifying introspection more profoundly explored than in H.P. Lovecraft's haunting masterpiece, The Outsider. A tale that dares to strip away the comfort of the familiar and plunge us into the abyss of self-realization, revealing that the most terrifying revelation is often the one that turns the mirror back upon ourselves. For what is more horrifying than discovering that you are the very thing you fear, that you are the grotesque anomaly in a world striving for beauty and light? Gather close, fellow pilgrims of the unknown, and let us delve into the shadows of a story that stands as a unique, almost gothic anomaly within Lovecraft's formidable bibliography, a narrative less concerned with tentacles and elder gods, and more with the chilling, introspective horror of identity lost, and then brutally, monstrously found. Our journey begins, as all good nightmares do, in a place of profound and unending darkness, a domain utterly cut off from the sun-drenched vibrancy of the living world. For the narrator of The Outsider knows nothing of light, nothing of companionship, nothing of the simple joys that define human existence. His entire world confined within the crumbling, nameless stones of an ancient colossal castle, a monstrous edifice whose very foundations are rooted in an abyss so deep, so lightless, that memory itself seems to recoil from its contemplation. He dwells not merely in solitude, but in a primordial isolation, his consciousness a single flickering flame in a boundless void. His only companions the decaying walls, the unseen, scurrying things, and the echoes of his own thoughts, which by necessity have become his entire universe. Yet even in this utter desolation, there stirs within him a profound and inexplicable longing, a yearning not just for an end to the darkness, but for a connection, for a glimpse of the beauty he instinctively knows must lie beyond his desolate prison, a beauty hinted at by the faint ancient tales he has somehow absorbed, tales of verdant fields, of towering trees, of glorious sunlight, and of beings like himself, or so he imagines, beings who walk beneath an open sky. The very air he breathes is thick with the dust of ages, the stench of decay, the damp chill of a forgotten tomb. For he's never seen the sky, never felt the warmth of the sun, his world a perpetual twilight, a subterranean gloom where the only light is the phosphorescent decay of ancient fungi or the fleeting spark struck from stone. And his memory, too, is a fragmented thing, devoid of origins, devoid of parents, devoid of any discernible past beyond the ceaseless, monotonous existence within these cyclopean walls. He is an entity born of darkness, shaped by solitude and defined by a gnawing emptiness, a desire for something more, for a revelation that might bestow upon him a sense of purpose or belonging. A desire that eventually grows so potent, so overwhelming, that it compels him to action, despite his inherent weakness, despite the crushing weight of ages that seems to press down upon him from every shadowy corner of his ancestral, or perhaps unancestral, prison. He resolves to escape, to climb the dizzying heights of the impossibly tall, ruined tower that pierces the perpetual night above his living tomb, a tower whose upper reaches, he dimly perceives, must surely break through into the fabled light, the world he has only dared to dream of. This ascent is no mere physical journey, but an odyssey of the soul, a torturous, agonizing climb through a labyrinth of crumbling stone, of slippery, moss-laden steps, of precarious ledges that stretch into the terrifying emptiness. A journey marked by an almost unbearable suspense, as each upward struggle brings him closer to an imagined salvation, yet also to an unknown horror. For what waits at the top of such a prison, such a monument to forgotten time, cannot be entirely benign. And the language Lovecraft employs here is masterfully crafted to convey the narrator's desperation, his almost childlike wonder mingled with an ancient inherent dread, his senses heightened by an eternity of darkness, allowing him to perceive subtle shifts in the air, faint currents that hint at an opening, a breach in the suffocating stone that has been his entire universe. After what feels like an eternity of relentless vertical struggle, an ascent that strains his very being to its limits, the narrator finally reaches the summit, breaking free from the suffocating gloom of the tower. And what greets him is not the blinding, glorious sunlight he had so fervently yearned for, but another form of illumination, a vast, pale, silvered light, the ethereal glow of a full moon, casting an unearthly pallor over a scene of profound and ancient beauty, a beauty that is simultaneously familiar and utterly alien. He finds himself not in a sun-drenched paradise, but in a vast, overgrown churchyard, a landscape of moss-covered gravestones and crumbling mausoleums, bathed in the spectral brilliance of the moonlight, the air alive with the scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation. A hauntingly beautiful tableau that, for a brief, glorious moment, fills him with an ecstasy, a sense of belonging he has never known. He gazes upon the world beyond his tower, a world of silent trees, of sleeping countryside, and of a distant, shimmering castle. A familiar shape in the moonlight, yet one that seems impossibly far away, impossibly transformed. It is here, in this moonlit graveyard, that the first seeds of disquiet begin to sprout. For as he marvels at the world, at the exquisite stillness of the scene, he notices something profoundly unsettling. The moonlit castle, the very one from which he has just emerged, appears to be an impossibly distant ruin, ancient and decayed, its highest turrets crumbling into dust, a stark contrast to the vibrant living entity he perceives himself to be. This spatial distortion, this temporal displacement, creates a chilling cognitive dissonance, a subtle hint that his perception of reality or of himself is fundamentally flawed, setting the stage for the earth-shattering revelation that is soon to follow. He wanders through the graveyard, drawn by an irresistible curiosity, an eagerness to finally interact with the world and its inhabitants, to find the companionship he has so desperately craved. His heart, or whatever rudimentary organ serves as such, throbbing with a mixture of terror and exhilaration, each step taking him further from the known darkness and deeper into the unsettling beauty of the unknown. His journey through the graveyard leads him to an unexpected sight, a grand, brightly lit castle, vibrant with music and laughter, a spectacle of joyful revelry, a stark contrast to the silent, decaying world he has known. Drawn by the warmth, by the promise of human connection, he approaches the castle, his heart pounding, a tremor of anticipation running through his being, convinced that he has finally found his place among beings like himself, beings who embrace life and light. And as he cautiously enters the castle's grounds, observing the dancers, the musicians, the joyful faces, a sense of ecstatic hope washes over him, a belief that his long, arduous journey has finally reached its glorious destination. that he is no longer an outcast, no longer a solitary shadow in an endless night, but a participant in the grand pageant of life. And yet, as he steps closer, as he attempts to mingle with the festive throng, a strange and terrible silence descends upon the gathering. The music falters, the laughter dies, and a collective gasp, a unified shriek of terror, rips through the night, a sound of such pure, unadulterated horror that it instantly chills him to the very bone. For the revellers are not merely startled, they are seized by an overwhelming, hysterical dread, their faces contorted in expressions of absolute disgust and fear, their eyes wide with an unspeakable terror. And then the moment of truth, the horrifying epiphany that shatters his perception of himself, of his world, and of his very existence. As the terrified crowd scatters, fleeing in panic disarray, tripping over one another in their desperate attempts to escape whatever unspeakable horror has invaded their festivities, the narrator, confused and deeply hurt by their irrational fear, searches for the source of their terror, looking for the monstrous intruder that has caused such an uproar. His gaze falls upon a doorway within which he glimpses a hideous, grotesque creature, a gaunt, skeletal being with decaying flesh, hollow eyes, and an expression of utter despair. A thing so vile, so utterly repulsive that he, too, feels a surge of primal revulsion, a sickness in his very core, and he watches in horrified fascination as this abomination stumbles forward, its horrifying features reflected in the smooth, polished surface of the doorway. A mirror. And then, with a jolt that rips through his consciousness, a revelation so profoundly shattering that it rewrites the very fabric of his reality. He realizes the unspeakable truth. The reflection in the mirror is his own. The monster, the grotesque, decaying horror, is him. This is the central, agonizing pivot of The Outsider, the moment where Lovecraft executes his masterstroke of psychological terror. The narrator is not merely an outsider because he is unknown to the world, but because he is the monster, an entity so intrinsically repulsive that his very presence evokes a primal, uncontrollable fear in those he desperately wished to join. His isolation, which he had perceived as a circumstance of birth and imprisonment, is revealed to be an inherent, immutable state of being. For he is a creature not just from the darkness, but of the darkness, a decaying, unwholesome horror whose very existence is anathema to the living world. And the profound tragedy of this moment is the complete destruction of his identity, the shattering of his self-perception, the brutal realization that his dreams of light and companionship were always a delusion, a cruel mockery of his true nature. This revelation plunges him into an abyss of self-horror, a dread far more personal and devastating than any external cosmic terror. For the enemy is not an elder god from beyond the stars, but the very image in the mirror, the unholy reflection of his own being. The aftermath of this revelation is swift and agonizing, with his dream of belonging irrevocably shattered, his soul irrevocably scarred. The narrator flees the castle, not back to the familiar darkness of his tower, which now appears as a distant decaying ruin, a monument to a past he can no longer truly recall, but into a desperate, frantic, aimless flight driven by the profound horror of his own existence. He becomes a wanderer in the liminal spaces of the world, a spectral presence flitting through moonlit landscapes, forever an outsider, forever hunted by the knowledge of his own monstrousness. And yet, in a twist that is both horrifying and strangely comforting, he eventually finds a form of solace, a semblance of belonging. Among the ghouls, those pallid subterranean denizens of the grave, those who are themselves outsiders, shunned by the living, For among them he finds a mirror of his own grotesque reality, a world where his appearance, his decay, his unnatural existence is not an anomaly, but a norm. A place where he can finally exist without evoking revulsion. A place where he is no longer the sole monstrous entity, but one among many. He accepts his fate, forever an outsider, forever alienated from the world of light and life, finding a grim companionship in the netherworld, a testament to the idea that even the most hideous of beings can find a corner of existence where they are not utterly alone, though that corner may be a forgotten tomb beneath a moonless sky. The outsider stands as a truly unique entry in Lovecraft's formidable oeuvre, a powerful testament to his versatility as a horror writer, demonstrating that his genius extended beyond the cosmic and into the profoundly psychological. For while his more famous tales deal with entities of unimaginable scale and indifference, with ancient evils that dwarf humanity, this story grounds its horror in the intensely personal, in the devastating realization that the monster is in fact us, a psychological terror that resonates with a primal fear of alienation and self-loathing. The theme of isolation, of course, is a recurring motif in Lovecraft's work, but here it is presented with an almost unbearable intensity, an isolation so absolute that it defines the very identity of the protagonist, shaping his understanding of the world and himself, only for that understanding to be brutally inverted, the dream of belonging crushed by the inescapable reality of his own grotesque form. This is isolation not as a mere physical state, but as an existential condition, an inherent unfitness for the world of the living. The Gothic atmosphere is another element that makes The Outsider so distinctive, placing it firmly in the tradition of Edgar Allan Poe, an author whom Lovecraft deeply admired and whose influence is palpably felt throughout this narrative. The decaying castle, the moonlit graveyard, the sense of ancient dread clinging to every stone and shadow, these are classic Gothic tropes employed with masterful precision, creating a pervasive sense of melancholy and unease that perfectly complements the narrator's internal journey. Lovecraft's descriptions of the castle, its abyssal foundations, its impossibly tall tower, evoke a sense of oppressive antiquity, of a place forgotten by time, a fitting prison for a being who is himself a relic, an anomaly, a forgotten horror. And the transition from the perpetual gloom of the castle to the spectral beauty of the moonlit graveyard is a brilliant stroke, lulling the reader and the narrator into a false sense of hope before the final, devastating reveal, highlighting the deceptive nature of beauty when juxtaposed with inherent ugliness, a beauty that merely serves to underscore the narrator's monstrousness rather than offer him solace. But it is the theme of self-horror, of existential dread, that truly elevates The Outsider to a masterwork of the genre. Unlike many of Lovecraft's protagonists who face external cosmic threats, the narrator here is the threat, his own reflection, an agent of unimaginable terror. And this twist is profoundly unsettling because it taps into a universal human fear, the fear of not belonging, the fear of being fundamentally different, the fear that beneath the veneer of self-perception lies an ugliness, a monstrosity that would utterly repel others, that would make us irrevocably alien. And Lovecraft, with his own documented struggles with social anxiety and a profound sense of being an outsider in his own time, infuses this narrative with a raw, autobiographical vulnerability that makes it incredibly poignant. One cannot help but feel that a part of Lovecraft's own deepest fears, his sense of being an anomaly in the world, found expression in this tragic tale of a creature who longs for light but is destined for darkness. This isn't just a story about a monster, it's a story about the profound anguish of realizing you are the monster, and the psychological impact of such a revelation is arguably more disturbing than any physical horror. The narrative also brilliantly explores the fragility of identity and the subjective nature of perception. For most of his life, the narrator has no external reference points, no mirrors, no other beings to reflect his image, and thus his identity is self-constructed, based on an internal understanding of self that is completely divorced from external reality, a construct that is violently shattered the moment he steps into the world and confronts the gaze of others, and more importantly, his own reflection. This highlights how much our sense of self is not merely internal, but a social construct shaped by how others see us. And when that external perception is one of pure, unadulterated horror, the internal self-image collapses entirely, leaving only a void. The very act of seeing himself through the eyes of others, and then through the mirror, is what transforms him from a hopeful, longing being into a self-aware horror, a pariah in a world that cannot and will not tolerate his existence, and the implications of this are chilling. Perhaps we are all, to some degree, only beautiful or normal, because the mirrors around us, both literal and metaphorical, confirm that perception. And what if, one day, those mirrors showed us something else entirely? Lovecraft's prose in The Outsider is a masterclass in atmospheric writing, employing his signature archaic vocabulary and labyrinthine sentence structures to create a sense of ancient dread and cosmic melancholy. He uses words like sepulchral, cyclopean, eidolon, nocturnal, and necromancy, not merely for effect, but to build a rich tapestry of dread, to evoke a world steeped in forgotten time and unimaginable horrors, and the sheer descriptive power of his language allows him to paint vivid, unsettling images without ever explicitly detailing the full horror of the narrator's appearance until the very moment of revelation, maintaining a suspenseful ambiguity that only heightens the impact of the final, devastating truth. The careful, almost poetic crafting of the narrative voice, an almost elegiac tone filled with longing and despair, ensures that despite the narrator's eventual monstrousness, we feel a profound empathy for his plight, for his desperate, heartbreaking yearning for acceptance, making his eventual downfall all the more tragic and poignant. The pacing, too, is meticulously controlled, with a slow, creeping build-up of unease that gradually escalates into the climax of pure terror, drawing the reader into the narrator's subjective experience of isolation and wonder, only to deliver a gut-wrenching blow of self-recognition. When considering The Outsider within the broader context of Lovecraft's work, it often stands as an outlier. A story that seems to lean more towards the gothic psychological horror of Poe rather than the cosmic, alien horrors of the Cthulhu mythos, yet it shares fundamental Lovecraftian DNA. The pervasive sense of dread, the exploration of profound alienation, the encounter with an unknown that shatters human sanity, these are all hallmarks of Lovecraft's distinctive vision. But here the unknown is not an entity from beyond the stars, but the horrifying truth of one's own being, and in a way this makes it even more terrifying, for there is no escape, no possibility of fighting or fleeing an external monster when the monster resides within. This story, therefore, functions as a powerful complement to his cosmic tales, demonstrating that the universe's indifference and its unimaginable horrors can be reflected in the most intimate and personal of ways, that the true abyss is often found not in the vastness of space, but in the deepest recesses of the human, or perhaps post-human, soul. The legacy of The Outsider is profound, resonating with anyone who has ever felt fundamentally different, fundamentally alienated, fundamentally alone. It taps into a deep-seated fear of being seen for what one truly is, particularly if that truth is perceived as ugly or monstrous, and its influence can be seen in countless works of horror and dark fantasy that explore themes of identity, otherness, and self-acceptance, or the tragic failure thereof. This story serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest monsters are not mythical beasts or ancient gods, but the distorted reflections of ourselves, and the horror is not in confronting them, but in realizing that there is no escape, no sanctuary, when the source of the terror is the very core of our being, when the mask we wear or the identity we construct is stripped away to reveal an unspeakable truth beneath, a truth that can only be understood perhaps by embracing the company of other outcasts, other monstrous forms in the shadowed realms far beneath the scornful gaze of the sun. The power of The Outsider lies in its ability to force us to confront not just the unknown, but the unsettling possibility that the most profound and unsettling unknown might just be ourselves, lurking beneath the veneer of what we wish to be, waiting for the perfect, terrible reflection to shatter our illusions. Lovecraft's brilliance in The Outsider lies not just in his unsettling imagery or his evocative prose, but in his profound understanding of human psychology, of the delicate balance between self-perception and external reality, and the catastrophic consequences when that balance is irrevocably shattered. It is a tale that remains etched in the mind long after the final word is read, a haunting melody of despair that speaks to the deepest anxieties about identity, acceptance, and the terrifying prospect of discovering a truth about oneself that is too hideous to bear, a truth that irrevocably severs one from the warm embrace of humanity and casts one into an eternal night of self-aware monstrosity. The story's enduring power comes from this universal applicability. We all, at some point, feel like an outsider, but Lovecraft forces us to imagine a reality where that feeling is not just a passing emotion, but a fundamental, inescapable truth, written into the very marrow of our bones, visible to all but ourselves until the fateful, shattering moment of revelation. It is a story that refuses to offer comfort, instead inviting us to gaze into the abyss of self-horror, and in doing so it elevates itself to a timeless exploration of what it means to be truly, irrevocably, monstrously alone. If this exploration into the shadows of identity and the terror of self-real has resonated with your own dark sensibilities, if the chilling beauty of Lovecraft's genius continues to draw you into the abyssal depths of cosmic horror and psychological dread, then please take a moment to like this video and be sure to subscribe for more Lovecraft videos as we continue our journey into the strange, the unknown, and the utterly terrifying, uncovering the truths that mankind was never meant to know. One ancient tale at a time, for the cosmos holds more horrors than we can ever imagine, and sometimes the most insidious ones reside not in the stars, but within the very confines of our own decaying forms.